can the same thing be applied to commerce? Okay, so to that, let's sort of peel the various layers of commerce and let's try to understand what commerce is at its fundamental level. Right? Okay, if you look at, and this is something, this is what we discovered, right? At least around the early 2020s. This is exactly what Sujit was specifying, that hey, we started off with a very specific domain called mobility. Then we started peeling off its domain-aware layers, and then we realized that commerce is at its fundamental level nothing but the buying and the selling of goods and services using some instrument of exchange, right? Which is usually money, right? Which means in all commerce, there is always a buyer and there's always a seller. Okay. Now the buyer, and nowadays, like, at least what's happening in the recent times, that the buyer and seller need to sort of come together, right, and perform a business transaction. The location where this transaction actually takes place is usually called as a market. E-commerce is exactly the same thing, except that there is instead of a physical market, you go to an online platform, which actually represents the market. Now, in today's world, most of the commerce is done via these platforms, right? We have Amazon, we have Facebook, we have Flipkart, and we have all these giants which are currently performing e-commerce, right? Now, these platforms play the role of adding that commerce-aware context to the otherwise generic packets of messages which are being transported by the internet infrastructure. Correct? The internet does not know whether a packet is actually a commerce packet, it's a payment, or it's just knowledge. You don't know, right? So these platforms play the role of adding that commerce-aware context. When I say adding that commerce-aware content, it basically means that they act as interpreters, okay, which translate the language spoken by the consumer into the language understood by the buyer, which basically means that the language of buying and selling is understood only by the owners of that platform. Okay, this solution, while elegant, right, and it has worked for like good 15-20 years. While it's elegant, it poses a few problems. Firstly, the buyer on one platform can only see the sellers which are on that other platform, because that's the only platform where the buyer and seller can understand each other, right? There's no way to know if there are any sellers like not on the platform unless you know that seller, and the fact for a fact that he's not on that platform, right? Secondly, the platform has like sort of complete discretion on which seller to show when a buyer requests for an item. The autonomy of the seller in deciding what his policies are slightly diminished, right? Now, thirdly, the total demand of the end consumer is accessible only by that platform. Okay, so now what's the solution to this, right? It looks like there are some very interesting points here, but it doesn't look like just a typical platform approach might be able to solve everything, right? There's one way. One way is for the buyer and seller to move to just another platform, a platform which is more suited to them. But that too has sort of the same story, right? From a buyer's point of view, maybe one platform has got good stores, while the other platform has good delivery, while the third platform has got better pricing, right? From a seller point of view, one platform might allow the seller to receive payment directly, or the other might take a commission on his sale, etc. Right? So the other platform maybe doesn't allow the seller to have his own delivery service. Could be a lot of scenarios, right? Now, so how do we bring the best of all these scenarios? Okay, that is like allowing the end consumer to choose the seller of his choice, and the seller to also retain autonomy of his store policy. Okay, one way is to simply just draw a line in between the buyer and the seller, right? Unbundle the buyer and the seller platforms and put them on a network. Okay, now just putting them on the network is not just enough. You also need to make them talk the same language of commerce, right? That way a buyer can speak to not just one, but an entire network of autonomous sellers. Similarly, the seller can have access to an entire network of buyers, right? Which are not necessarily on the same platform, right? So the buyer platform creates the demand and experience. The seller platforms create the policy and fulfills that demand on their own terms. If the seller doesn't like the terms offered by one platform, he can always use these specifications to independently plug into his own terms, right? And plug into the network and publish his policy on his own terms. Similarly, if the buyer doesn't like the experience offered by one platform, he can always move to another platform on the network without losing access to the same sellers he wants. That is essentially what an open commerce network will do. Okay? And that is exactly what we're trying to do here, trying to build open commerce networks using open protocols, right? Let's go into a little more detail, right? This is basically a visualization of what we talked about earlier, just like the email, right? This is the same concept can be applied for commerce, right? Here we have like Google on one side, and a buyer platform like, for example, let's say Goodbox on the other side, which is a Kirana aggregator. Both use a common language of commerce, right, and an underlying infrastructure for discovery and routing, right, just like our discussion. So as you remember that, we are sort of taking some inspiration from the design of the internet and actually going backwards on to the time where the internet was first designed and was created to, for a common created as a common public digital infrastructure for anybody to communicate, right? So yeah, so that's that common language of commerce is called Beckn, right? So let's see what Beckn is. Okay, now Beckn, okay, is a very similar set of open specifications that actually allow creation of open networks like the internet, right? The difference being that while the TCP/IP protocol is context agnostic, Beckn is context aware by design. More specifically, Beckn is a commerce context-aware design, meaning that the specification is designed to understand the fundamental nature of commercial transaction at the application and network level, rather than just at an application level, which we sort of have what we have nowadays, right? Meaning that, today we need to log in to these applications which understand commerce transactions by interpreting the message packets arriving from the network layer. The problem with that approach is that each of these applications interpret these packets in their own way, right? So one downside of that is that is a loss of interoperability between the business machines at the network layer. As a result, to actually create interoperability between multiple platforms, they require some sort of a bridging interface, right, at the application layer. Like, they are available in the form of platform APIs, deep links, webhooks, and embeddable code, etc., which, although possible, are not elegant or scalable solutions at a population scale, right? So hence, Beckn basically is a set of open specifications consisting of standard APIs, standard schemas, domain-specific taxonomies, and some frameworks which allow creation of open networks, which basically enable commerce-aware communication between business machines at the network layer. Okay. Now we'll go into each of these core concepts. I know there's a lot packed into this one line, right? But we will try to peel off the layers as we have done before, and actually see what this is all about. Okay. So now, as you can see, this is on the left. What you see is an example of an open commerce network, right? On the top, you see buyer platforms. On the bottom, you see seller platforms. And on the top, you have the customers. On the bottom, you have the sellers, right? In between, there are these red dots which actually route the packets from the buyer platform to seller platform and vice versa, right? Now, what happens as a result? There are commercial transactions, okay, which basically happen at a domain agnostic level. It results in interoperability between the various sectors, okay. It enables smart contracts between a buyer and the seller, okay. There is platform discovery, which means that a buyer platform does not need to be aware that a new seller platform has been added to a network. The network automatically discovers, like, for example, just like the internet, right, where whenever there's a new website which has been launched, you don't actually need to know whether that website has been launched. You can always, there are other infrastructures which are available which help you discover these new platforms, right? So that is there. And then obviously packet switching, which means that whatever based on the context or based on the type of information or based on the type of business you want to contact with, okay, the network actually routes your packet or discovers the relevant platforms which are applicable for your intent. Okay? So these are some ideas, okay, or some concepts, okay, which are enabled using a common set of specifications, which is called as Beckn. Okay. Now that we have these top level concepts clear, okay, let's go slightly deeper into the actual Beckn ecosystem architecture.